Hello. I go to the Kansas City Art Institute, and I was given homework to watch your videos on analogical reasoning. And I just finished the third one when you talk about like the main parts of figurative language, the master tropes or whatever. At the end, you ask first people to send you questions, and that's what I'm doing right now. And my question stems back to your first video on like how to skin a cat, I believe was the name of the video. And at the end of that video, after you explain kind of analogical reasoning, you show your bronze bust, your oil painting, your drawing, and then another drawing. And you're saying that you use analogical reasoning essentially to connect these things, that analogical reasoning that led you from the bronze bust to the oil painting to the drawing to the other drawing, and eventually you get to this, like the last drawing is like your finished thing. And my question is, are you expecting the viewer to be able to look at the finished thing and read the analogical reasoning and know that you use analogical reasoning by looking at the one finished thing that is a product of like all these other processes too? Or are you saying that by using analogical reasoning and pushing this kind of idea through multiple mediums, that it's ultimately going to result in a finished thing that has more movement, that speaks more, essentially, is my question. So yeah, that's my question. Let me know if you do not understand the question, because I can try to rephrase it maybe in a way that makes more sense. But yeah, that's my question. So yeah.
Hey Ben, thanks for taking the time to record a question concerning the small series I did on analogical reasoning. It helps me out a lot because I think that what it does is it helps clarify my thinking on the issue, and it also points out a number of the problems in the video, in that I didn't communicate clearly enough what the main idea was. So it does help me out tremendously. You're going to hear some grinding noises in the background. There's two things that are going on today. The first of which is that Cranbrook, or Detroit, is in the middle of snowpocalypse, so they're going to be what do you call it? They're going to be plowing all week, plowing today, and then also my lovely wife Darlene is working on metalsmithing in the background.
Sorry.
So anyway, more to the point. Yeah, there are two main reasons, as far as I see it, why I'm interested in analogical reasoning. And the basic definition, the simplest definition, is using analogy, using the innovations and the understanding of one distinct element, term A, to drive to understand term B. So these two dissimilar things, using lateral thinking to understand and to drive, using term A to drive and understand term B. And there are two main issues, two main reasons why I'm interested in that subject matter. The first of which is that for the past 17 years, I've run a graduate program in 2D, which you can effectively think of as an experimental graphic design department. Most importantly, during that time, I've had a front row seat watching very high level students develop. And over that time period, I've come to the understanding that my understanding of intelligence is that it is as much a set of behaviors as it is any innate capacity of our wetware, of our brain. I think there's this idea that IQ is simply something that one is born with, and I wholeheartedly reject that idea. I've seen a common set of behaviors over my time that seem to propel the individual, seem to drive the individual's work into ever increasingly compelling and stimulating area. Analogical thinking being a part of that. But so I've done a couple of videos on these behaviors that I'll try to link to at the end of this video. But to recount, the primary behavior that I see is, above all else, the capacity for the individual to suspend preconceived notions of what one thinks they understand. So we all think that we understand our own work. We all think that we understand ourselves. We think we understand culture to a degree. And the more firmly held our convictions, when we are given criticism, oftentimes, the less likely we are to suspend what we believe we know about the thing under discussion, and to attempt to truly see that thing from the perspective of another individual. So chief, primary, first, among the behaviors that I've seen in my very high-performing students who seem to be learning at an accelerated rate is the capacity, I guess, to listen and to, particularly when given criticism, to suspend their preconceived notions about their own work, about what they understand, and to attempt to accept, for a brief moment, to accept what the other person is stating as true. The second behavior that I see in my high performing and students whose work is developing at a high rate is this capacity to use lateral thinking, to use the structure of analogy, to use this idea of term A, to use lateral thinking to shed light and to drive the work in another area. So as an example, we see behind me, a painting, a large 6 foot by 4 foot painting over my right shoulder that is currently under development, and we see this piece over my left shoulder. Really, largely what's at play in these pieces, and you can see this later this week, I'll be posting a piece of experimental graphic design that is derived directly from and driven from my understanding and from my thinking, my biological thinking in this piece. And in this piece of design was in some way motivated by and driving the piece over my left shoulder. So first, again, the primary consideration in analogical thinking for me is that it is a constituent component. It's an important component of my capacity to continue to try to develop intellectually. And it's something that I see over and over in high-functioning and very quickly learning students. So that's the primary consideration. The secondary consideration is the idea that within the field, that I often see people enter my studio. They could be 21 years old, 23 years old, they could be 45 years old. But generally, they're looking for more in their approach to design and contemporary art. And I'm often shocked, even at this level, how foundation studies particularly in visual communication, graphic design, and also in art, many of the foundational principles that are being taught, not with regard to form, but with regard to the behavior of the designer, are the exact opposite, I would say, of what you find at the very apex of the profession. And what I mean by this is that I would go so far as to say that any of the designers whose work you're familiar with exhibit a kind of the opposite behavior of the type of one specific type of behavior that I believe that is being trained in undergraduate school. And what is that? Let's say you work for a design firm somewhere. Typically, on Tuesday of a given week, the Metropolitan Museum of Art would come in and would require an identity campaign or some kind of promotional material that you would be producing for them. 2 weeks later, you'd have to present a set of ideas. Later that week, if you're lucky, a downtown Soho-based off-Broadway theater might come into the studio and require promotional material or an identity system. The same designer, in some instances, would be working on those two different campaigns. So the designer is being trained to have a kind of protein, a kind of ever shape-shifting, formally dexterous approach to the creation of work. And I would suggest that this is a good thing in the cube farm at certain levels of design. But I would also go so far as to say that any designer whose name you know, their work doesn't conform to this idea of appropriateness where the flagrant agency, the hand of the designer is missing from the work. So many of the behaviors that are being taught are about a kind of collectivity, about a kind of antenna, about the idea that the designer can be plugged into what is contemporary and what is hot and hip, and to produce work that fits into a genre. In one of my previous videos, I referred to this website called trendlist.org, where we see a kind of new international style. I mean, if you look around contemporary graphic design, you find a kind of homogeneity, a sameness, particularly in graduate student portfolios. We find work that conforms to this new international style. We can actually even catalog what those formal moves are. To my mind, those are absolutely the kiss of death for the sentient, the self-actualized designer whose goal it is to have a kind of agency and to kind of live life on their own terms. What that speaks to is it speaks to a collectivity, it speaks to a lack of originality, and it speaks to the desire to be part of a hip, collective, global group of individuals. Again, I don't think that behavior exists at the top of a set of pyramids. So how does analogical reasoning play into that? Analogical reasoning is a primary tool, the structure of analogy, letting two dissimilar elements, letting term A in that dissimilar set drive term B. It is a structural way of untethering yourself, untethering the designer, decoupling your work from this sense of collectivity, this idea that these pieces, that this work should in some way look like the new international style. If I'm using the structure of analogy, if I'm using analogical thinking to drive the work, it decouples that work, it frees me from the thinking that pushes my work into this group aesthetic. So to answer your question very, very directly, it is not important to me in any way, shape, or form that you can read in the object, either in the painting, the sculpture, the drawing, or the experimental graphic design, that it was driven by another element. What's important to me in analogical thinking is that I believe it's a primary behavior of high IQ and that it's something that can be cultivated. The IQ can be cultivated. Intelligence can be cultivated. And secondarily, it is a way of losing, of creating both formally and conceptually dexterous and powerful work without having it hew to, without having it conform to this ridiculous collectivity that suffuses, that permeates contemporary culture. So thanks for sending this video. Also, I want to encourage anyone else who has any questions, comments, or concerns about any of the videos that I've produced in the Studio Practice series to reach out to me via earls@cranbrook.edu and record a video, shoot a video, send it to me. I can't guarantee I will answer each and every one of them. I will in fact try. And then I will link right here to some of the videos that I've been discussing. So thanks, Ben.